the beginning. Well, I don't know if there's any points for epic openers, but I thought I'd give it a shot. Hi, my name's David Burke, and I'm a student at the American College of Education. I'd like to give a story about the story behind the story on a project that I've been working on for a while. That's not working. What's the deal? Let's try that again. In the beginning. Well, I don't know if there's any points for epic openers, but I thought I'd give it a shot. My name's David Burke, and this is a digital storyboard on a project that I've been working on for some time called the Digital Codex Planning Process. So what I'd like to do today is tell you a little bit about how it began, how it originated, because it's a story, I think, worth telling. But let me assure you that if there's any one thing I've learned, it's this. Pedagogy can be messy. The idea of directing oneself in learning was fascinating to me, and I really got into the process, really committed, immersed myself into my research. But frankly, I did not know what I was doing, and it led to a ton of inefficiencies. And really, it's what drove me to go back to graduate school, because I thought and committed to the idea that getting into an academic program would give me the rigor and the structure that I would need to finish the research that I had begun. So far, it's going okay, but that was no guarantee that any of my research would work. So this is really the end of the story right here. This is the assignment that we started the project with. The learning target is that students will create an original work here at a digital story production. So I'll admit that it's a little bit meta, but what you'll see here is a learning grid that has a variety of activities that go through an entire stage of learning and a model. Here we use Bloom's. The verbs are very carefully chosen to reflect a depth of knowledge in each stage. And you can see that it has been designed to reflect universal design areas of engagement, representation, and action expression. So this is sort of how the story ends. But let's take a look really at some of the goals for the whole process, and that's supporting blended learning. The whole idea really was to create a process that would help me in my teaching. And then importantly to me is the idea of supporting students, empowering them to choose the way they want to learn and choose the way they want to express knowledge. And then finally, integrate assessment so that it could be a sustainable process for the student. And really the search for sustainability is a key part of this story. Now, this story is beginning to look a little bit too PowerPointy, so let's get into something that might have a little more fun. From left to right, this is Daniel, Michael, and Mary. These are my family, and Daniel and Michael, a little bit older now, they're in college, but even when they were younger than this, they were Cub Scouts, and I was a Cub Scout assistant to the assistant den leader, and we had a lot of fun, and Scouts is great. But one thing that I wasn't crazy about with scouting was the fundraising requirements. Every year, buy 2 boxes of chocolate at $30 a box times 2 kids for 4 years. It added up, and it made for one sad dad. So I put my mind to, what can we do that's better? There's got to be a better solution than selling chocolate every year. So, I started thinking, well, what could we sell? What could we do differently? And the idea was to create a resource that would be a perpetual source of income, some sort of sustainable fundraising process that wouldn't require selling anything over the course of a year. So what this really did echo was some of the promises of direct sales strategies or multi-level marketing or network marketing. It goes by many names, but the idea, and shown here in a binary model where you tell 2 friends and they tell 2 friends and so on. This model is an interesting one. It clearly explains how the idea that you're getting people involved, and if you're a successful organizer, you're going to have the benefits of that residual income. And the thinking was, instead of a person being in that position, it could be an organization like the Scouts. So what did I do about it? Well, I founded a 501c3 called Sustainable Fundraising. It was listed as a research organization, and we studied economics, really focusing on the business practices and all of the requirements and nuances of the direct sales industry. There were some interesting parts to this, and it was really it drives the beginning of the story. But it didn't work out so well, and in the end, we ended up, instead of going through as a nonprofit, we incorporated as a business. So between the not-for-profit and the business entity, you can see that my heutagogy really took me to the limits of what was possible in real-world, authentic scholar practitioner work. But getting back to a little bit more of the basics of who I was at the time, I was a PE teacher. I taught physical education at Brooks Middle School, and you can see our beautiful campus there with the library in the back and some fitness equipment in the foreground. You might recognize these two students, but they are demonstrating capacity here. Yikes, we're off target here in a big way. At the end of the day, I was a physical educator by trade. You might recognize these young role models as I use them to produce an instructional piece for my students that would really be used at all levels, including a program that we had called at the end of the day, I was a physical educator by trade. And while I did enjoy developing curriculum and programming opportunities for my department, I particularly enjoyed working on a class called PE Leaders, where we would take role model students and then train them up even further. And then in their 8th grade year, they would have an opportunity to demonstrate positive leadership and build relationships with other students. So the idea of PE leadership was an important tenet in my professional career, and something that I wanted to bring forward into this research. Now, I used a learning model called the TPSR, Teaching Personal and Social Responsibility. So the TPSR model was designed by a guy named Dr. Don Hellison. And Hellison's model has 5 levels of achievement. You start with basic respect in the classroom and in the gym. Then you work on to effort and cooperation, self-direction. And then we really started to get into some leadership areas here about helping others. And then level 5, of course, the highest level in the model is transfer, where you take what you learn in the gym and you bring it out to the real world. I love it. It's great. It's very solid. And for a physical education program, it's a great framework for a lot of social and emotional types of development. But I thought that there might be some more to this model, and I would propose that level 6 would be that while in transfer, you're collaborating with others who are also in transfer, and then that together you were creating new things, real live entities, not unlike the 501c3. So when we brought these kids together and we had all of these guys working together on some of the projects that we did, like a 5K run or a special event after school, these were sustainable if we were going to do them every year. There were some problems with the model because obviously students turn over every year. It's a blessing and a curse because You can have sustainable kids, but you might not. Jesus Christ, that's terrible. I liked Hellison's model, but I thought there could be more. I would propose that there is a sixth level where, while in transfer, you collaborate with others in transfer to create organizations and assets that would sustain beyond the one's own participation in that organization. So this kind of development level of learning was theoretical, but actually achieved in practice, because our 501c3 had student volunteers, and we were all taking what we learned, because a lot of them were in that leadership program. We're taking what we learned in our basic leadership class. We're putting it out into the community. We hosted a 5K and some after-school events that were fundraisers, and we made money, and it looked like it could work. So we had some decent data on the front end of this. I also thought there was another level, and that would be level 7, where if you're good enough at what you do as a group, that other people would do it too. So that idea of replication might sound familiar, in that idea of sustainable, replicable, multi-level networking. So the idea that there could be a model that might be replicable, it had enough of truth to me that I really wanted to pursue it even further. So what did I do? I went to Utah, where they had a conference for the Direct Sales Association of America. Here's some footage of the event. And it's nice. We had a beautiful hotel. Salt Lake City is a wonderful place. And we learned quite a bit about the economics and practices of the industry. But I needed to do a little bit more. And after I visited the Mormon Tabernacle Choir there, I rented a car and headed west. Went past the Great Salt Lake, which was my first time out there. And, I'm out in this big sky country, and it's just me and space. And I'm thinking about all this, these unachievable ideas of sustainable fundraising and creating something out of nothing, and really working in the theoretical. And I saw a street with a salt mine on it. I pull over. It's called Skull Valley Road. So I couldn't help myself. I pulled over, and I'm, taking pictures as I go along. And it's a beautiful desert. It's a fantastic. It's surrounded by 2 ranges of mountains, and there's some cows, and there's all kinds of wildlife actually. And I enjoyed the time and space. But I'm in the middle of the desert, and I see this sign here, and I pull over, and it turns out that this is a national park. And right there in front of me, right in the middle of the desert, is a freshwater spring. And I'm stunned by this. It's surreal to me that I would be in the middle of nowhere, looking for sustainability, looking for some sort of self-generating asset. And out of nowhere, I found a freshwater spring. Well, this appeared as a sign from God, to be quite honest. It was something that I couldn't walk away from. It was a sign that said, Dave, keep going. Now, unlike this video, which I should really wrap up right now, because our good friends at Screencastify, which is the tool that I'm using for this digital story, they suggest that attention drops off a cliff after 2 to 3 minutes, and I'm way beyond that. So I'm going to bring this home here, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about the before part. Why was I even interested in any of that? Long story short is I needed to find a way to generate revenue that could be sustainable. And if I did it as a business, as the business owner, I could donate it back to whatever organization I want. I wanted to be a philanthropic organization and be the entity that created that sustainable fundraising for others. That was the goal. Well, as I said, I didn't really know what I was doing, so I enrolled in the ACE. And when I got through a couple semesters, I came across an author named Dr. Atsushi Hirumi. Dr. Hirumi, as you can see here in his latest research, is a well-achieved doctor who studies online learning and a lot of artificial intelligence and things like that. This book series here, Online and Hybrid Learning, really changed my life. Dr. Harumi's understanding of grounded theory, where you embed a learning theory into a sequence of interactions, really helped me understand what online learning, the mechanics of it, how it actually could work. In my model here that I finally was able to kind of reconstruct in my own brain, we would start by generating learning targets. And then we designed activities that really had three characteristics. Number one, it definitely gives students choice. And then it promotes a depth of knowledge throughout a learning stages, and then produces evidence. Finally, assessment is an important part of it, and we would want to do that in a way that students could self monitor. So these are the three parts of it, and this was the original version of the first learning grid. We use blooms again, going across the top here, and then at the bottom here, and this is Harumi's idea really, in addition to the grounded theory, is that we have a human interaction types and automated interaction types. And by having a blended mix of these two, you create a more comprehensive and ideally more effective learning process for online learners. Let's take a look at those learning targets for just a second. Now, I mentioned that I was into PE leadership, and I was. So I needed some national standards, though, to use as a target. So we took the NACET Youth Development Domain Standards, and there were 4 major ones, and each one of them has their own domain, descriptors, I should say. And then across the top, we have the ISTE standards, and their 7 domains, and each one of their descriptors. So by taking perhaps one of the descriptors from this side and one of the descriptors from this side, we could merge them through just simple writing, practices into one learning target. So now you have co-aligned learning targets. It turns out that this is the only sustainable part of all my research, because as long as we have standards that could be cross-aligned, you'll always be able to create an infinite number of learning targets. So in that sense, it's a very small consolation prize. The self-assessment piece comes at the end of the rubric, where, let's say, again, you have a learning grid here. You've got a particular activity in this grid. Here we have something in the evaluate stage of learning in a online tools capacity. So the target becomes predict technical difficulties. And then the student does what they need to do, and then they have a self-assessment rubric where they can clearly pick one of them. The next phase of this process is to find ways to automate this so that a student can simply click and enter a number that can be automatically calculated in their grading. It's a good idea, I just haven't developed it yet. One reason it's called a codex is because it comes from the ancient artifact of the pre-book form. You can see here the Mayans had some codex, and other cultures did too. But if you notice the layered nature of this design, where we take national standards and we take their descriptors to create a learning target for a grid, and you have a number of grids put together for a unit, and then each one of those activities has an assessment piece. You can see that the layers actually, they earn the name codex. So here's the model of itself. Again, it's a theoretical model that's actually undergone some changes already to reflect the depth of knowledge piece. We split online and real world grids apart. So actually each target has 2, one in the real world, one in the online. And then the rigor gets a little bit better. And then, of course, the learning assessment at the end, still in development. And here's the latest version of that development. So this is a working project. This is something that I'm going to have my students do when they create a digital story about how they can achieve the 3 goals in our classroom of applying technology effectively, being self-directed, and promoting mutual respect. So the idea is to give them options, to guide them in the basic understanding of things, and then get them over here so that they're actually at least in the analyzing and evaluating stage. Because honestly, creation stages are very, very difficult, particularly for middle school students, where my field practice has kind of uncovered that they have some real cognitive capacity things just because they're really not developed enough to get into the idea of working in the real world based on the principles and theories that you're learning in the classroom. So it's difficult for them to get to that high level, but I keep it there because you never know. So I do want to say thank you to a couple of very special people, Dr. Harumi and Dr. Hellison. These guys are my Mount Rushmore of this model and have been a real inspiration for me all along, as well as we go back to my family, the boys and my wife, who kept me sane through this whole process. So thanks for listening to my story. I hope it made sense and was informative and entertaining. Thank you and goodbye.